All right, let's set the stage. The year is 331 BC, and we are looking at the ultimate winner-takes-all clash of the ancient world. I'm talking about a moment where the fate of the entire known world literally hangs in the balance on a dusty Mesopotamian plain. The undefeated Macedonian force of Alexander the Great is about to collide head-on with the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire of King Darius III.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because the stakes leading up to this battle perfectly highlight Alexander's incredible, almost reckless hubris. After Alexander had already crushed the Persians at the Battle of Essus and literally captured Darius's own family, the Persian king was desperate. He sent multiple negotiation attempts. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus actually records that during the final offer, Alexander's trusted general Parmenion urged him to accept, saying, "If I were Alexander, I should accept what was offered and make a treaty." Alexander's legendary reply, "So should I, if I were Parmenion." He just flatly rejected peace, declaring there could only be one king of Asia.
To really understand that supreme confidence, we've got to look at the military machine he inherited from his dad, Philip II. Philip revolutionized Greek warfare by organizing his warriors to stand close together in a super tight square. But the real game changer was the spear. He armed his soldiers with these massive 16-foot-long spears called sarissas. This created a literal bristling wall of wood and iron that kept enemies at a distance and allowed the army to attack relentlessly, all supported by incredibly well-trained cavalry.
Armed with this unstoppable phalanx, Alexander's march was just relentless. He sweeps from Greece, down through Asia Minor, and straight into Egypt, which actually surrendered peacefully. But instead of marching directly southeast to Babylon, which would have exposed his guys to brutal heat and supply shortages, Alexander took a strategic northern route so he could forage for supplies. He pushed his exhausted men right up to the perilous crossing of the Tigris River, directly into the heartland of the Persian Empire.
Now, what's really interesting here is how desperate King Darius was getting to stop this advance. He resorted to these escalating attempts to simply buy Alexander off. In his third and final offer, Darius proposed 30,000 talents of silver, all the territory west of the Euphrates River, co-rulership of the entire Persian Empire, and the hand of his daughter in marriage. It was an offer of unimaginable wealth and power. But for Alexander, it wasn't about sharing the world, it was about taking the whole shebang.
So Alexander crosses the Tigris River with great difficulty in late September, and the tension is absolutely palpable. The Persian commander Mazias had been using scorched earth tactics, burning the countryside to starve the Greeks out. Then, right after the river crossing, bam! A near-total lunar eclipse happens on September 20th to 21st. That was a highly ominous sign in the ancient world. 4 days later, Alexander's scouts capture Persian riders and discover the terrifying truth. Darius's massive army is encamped at a village called Gaugamela, just 8 miles away.
Can you even imagine the psychological weight of what those Macedonians saw when they looked across the plains? Ancient historians like Arrian and Plutarch claim the Persian infantry numbered a staggering 1 million men. Now, modern historians definitely dispute that number, but think about it from a foot soldier's perspective. Staring out at the horizon, the enemy campfires must have looked like stars in the night sky. The sheer psychological terror of facing what felt like a million-man army is just hard to wrap your head around.
Even looking at the actual numbers for this ultimate David versus Goliath matchup, you can see just how extreme the odds were. Alexander commanded roughly 47,000 troops. Even using conservative modern estimates for Darius's army, somewhere between 50,000 and 250,000 men, the disparity is staggering. The Macedonians were outnumbered by at least 5-1 in cavalry alone. Plus, Darius brought out the heavy hitters, 15 Indian war elephants and 200 terrifying scythe chariots. The deck was incredibly stacked against Alexander.
And Darius wasn't just relying on his numbers, he was banking on the terrain. He had literally flattened the earth at Gaugamela. He actually ordered his men to clear away bushes, vegetation, and natural obstacles to create a perfectly flat track. Why? Specifically to maximize the devastating impact of those 200 scythe chariots. He wanted them hitting top speed, with sharp blades attached to their wheels, charging directly into the dense Macedonian phalanx to just chop them to pieces.
So how in the world do you beat an army that outnumbers you and has prepared the literal perfect trap? Well, you do the unexpected. Darius formed a traditional Persian line. He placed himself right in the center, surrounded by his best infantry, the 10,000 immortals, with massive cavalry wings on either side. Alexander, though, he advanced his infantry in an echelon formation, meaning his wings were angled back at 45 degrees. He did this intentionally to lure the Persian cavalry out to the flanks and away from the center. It's an absolute masterclass in forcing your enemy to react to you.
Let's move to the next phase and see how this builds, because this turns into one of the greatest tactical masterstrokes in military history. Step 1, that angled advance. Step 2, brilliantly, Alexander personally leads his right wing and just keeps drifting to the right, almost marching entirely off that flattened ground Darius prepared. This forces Darius to stretch his own line to keep up. Third, the Macedonians perfectly neutralize the chariot trap. And finally, all that stretching creates a fatal gap in the Persian line, setting up the most decisive charge of the war.
Before we get to that gap, we've got to talk about how they handled those terrifying chariots. Seeing Alexander drift off the smooth ground, Darius kind of panics and launches them early. But the Macedonians were ready. They hit a bunch of them with a barrage of javelins. Then, for the ones that got through, the infantry executed this ingenious mousetrap maneuver. They literally just opened their ranks. They created empty alleys, the chariots sped harmlessly through the gaps, and the rear guards just dragged them down. Boom. The ultimate weapon, totally neutralized.
Right, so with the chariots gone and the Persian left wing pulled super far out to stop Alexander's drift, a massive gap suddenly tears open in the Persian center. This was the exact moment Alexander had been waiting for. He quickly groups his companion cavalry and infantry into a giant wedge, a massive V-shaped formation. And with Alexander himself at the very tip, this wedge charges at breakneck speed, smashing directly into that weakened gap, making a beeline straight for King Darius and his royal guard.
The historical accounts of this moment are just wildly dramatic. As Alexander's cavalry crashes into the Persian center, thrusting spears right at their faces, the Persian line buckles. Arrian tells us that Darius is so overwhelmed by the sheer terror of this unstoppable wedge charging right at him, he completely loses his nerve. He is the very first to turn his chariot and flee the battlefield. And with the king running away, the entire center of the Persian army just collapses in panic.
So Alexander is mere moments away from catching Darius and ending the entire war in a single stroke. But then, a major crisis. Desperate riders arrive from Parmenion on the Macedonian left flank. Parmenion's wing is completely encircled by the massive Persian right wing. They are taking incredibly heavy casualties, and the line is about to break. Alexander faces an agonizing leadership choice. Does he pursue the fleeing king and win his ultimate prize, or does he abandon the chase to turn back and save his struggling men?
Well, Alexander chooses his men. He actually pulls his companion cavalry away from the pursuit of Darius, wheels them around, and crashes right into the rear of the Persian forces attacking Parmenion. Arrian describes this as the fiercest cavalry fight of the entire day. The Macedonians suffer heavy losses. 60 companions are killed, several top generals wounded, but Alexander prevails. He breaks the encirclement and saves the flank. The catch, of course, is that this delay means Darius escapes into the distant mountains.
So, the crucial point here is the sheer scale of the victory when the dust settles. The Macedonians lost at most around 1,500 men. The Persian losses? Absolutely catastrophic. We're talking estimates from 40,000 up to an astounding 90,000 dead, plus the loss of their war elephants, the king's chariot, and his royal bow. Even though Darius escaped, his army was completely obliterated as an effective fighting force. It remains for sure one of Alexander's finest and most decisive victories.
The fallout was rapid and literally world-changing. Following the victory in October 331 BC, the great city of Babylon formally surrendered to Alexander without a fight. As for Darius, his end is totally tragic. While fleeing east to raise a new army, he was betrayed and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus. When Alexander found his respected rival dead, he actually gave him a royal burial at Persepolis. But with Darius gone, Alexander became, essentially, the sole ruler of the Persian Empire.
But here's the thing, without his sheer force of will, that massive unified empire just didn't last. He conquered the known world, sure, but he died young at age 33 without a clear heir. His generals immediately started fighting for power, and the empire violently fractured into three major distinct realms: Hellenistic Macedonia, Syria, and Egypt. However, the fragmentation of his borders didn't destroy his true lasting legacy, which was cultural. Historians call this the Hellenistic era, meaning Greek-like. Alexander encouraged conquered peoples to keep their traditions, but he heavily injected Greek influence by building dozens of new cities, famously naming many of them Alexandria. This created a massive, blended culture combining Persian, Egyptian, Syrian, and Greek ideas. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became the ancient world's greatest hubs for culture, art, and scientific learning.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder for this explainer. There's a famous legend that early in his campaign, Alexander was presented with an impossibly tangled rope, the Gordian knot, where the person who unraveled it was prophesied to rule Asia. Instead of untangling it, Alexander simply drew his sword and slashed it in half. He won the world with this swift, brutal, forceful method of solving problems, exactly like he did at Gaugamela. But you have to wonder, did that very approach, conquering through speed and violence rather than careful administrative building, basically guarantee that his empire would fracture the moment he was gone? Thank you for exploring the Battle of Gaugamela with me, and keep questioning the history behind the legends.